Here we are in part 3 of chapter 7, Emotional Messages and Emotional Competence. One of the first steps, and probably the best step for trying to figure out if you express emotions well, it's going to be increased self-awareness. Now, there are a lot of tests out there that can help you measure your emotional intelligence, your social intelligence, those kinds of things. And I recommend that you go find those tests and you take them and look at your answers, see what those tests tell you about yourself. But here are some more basic things. You can ask these questions, such as, what am I feeling and what made me feel this way? And be as objective as possible. Don't pin blame on someone else for making you feel the way that you feel, but look at the events. Another question you can ask yourself is, what exactly do I want to communicate? Do I want to say exactly what I mean, or do I want to hold back a little bit? We have this thing called masking. And masking is where you display one emotion while feeling a different emotion. And this can at times be good. It can at times have negative impacts on our relationships. So be careful about when you mask and who you mask with. If it's a relationship that you value, oftentimes masking too often will come across as deception and will have a negative impact on that relationship. And then the third question here, what are my communication choices? So what is the best thing that I can do to help achieve my goal? If I'm upset, how do I fix that? If I don't understand something and I'm frustrated, how do I fix that? So some of the questions that you'll ask yourself as a follow-up here is, what is the best and most ethical way to fix whatever problem it is that you're dealing with emotionally? And once you kind of increase your self-awareness so you can understand where your emotions are coming from, here's some guidelines for emotional expression. Now, there's a lot of them here, and I'm going to briefly define a few of them, but you will find more lengthy definitions on page 197 of your textbook. 197. First of all, you want to be descriptive and specific. So, whenever you are describing how you feel to someone else, sometimes we say things like, well, I'm just super upset. Well, what does upset mean? Does that mean that you're sad? Does it mean that you're angry? Does it mean that you're frustrated? There are a lot of different interpretations of that word. So you want to be specific. When you know what they are, describe the reasons for your current feelings. Again, avoid blaming other people. Talk about events. If you express yourself through mixed feelings, this can be confusing. And so, again, you want to be specific. So, for instance, if you're in a situation where it makes you happy and sad at the same time, that's confusing. Try to clear it up and address the fact that, yes, you are feeling both of those, but address the reasons why you're feeling both of those. Try to anchor emotions in the present. Don't dwell on the past. Talk about things that are happening in the here and now. Not how you felt last week whenever something happened, but how you feel about it now. Be clear about how you want people to react. So whenever you're talking to someone and you're trying to fix a problem, ask for what you want using I messages. And we'll come back to that in a moment. You want to also respect emotional boundaries. Some people are very comfortable sharing their emotional state, other people are not. And there are some relationships that bear a lot of emotional expression, and then others that do not bear that type of emotional expression. And so respect those boundaries within the relationship. Know your own boundaries as well. Whenever it comes to addressing your own feelings, recognize they are your own feelings. So you've got to own them. No one makes us feel anything. It's our own reaction to whatever stimulus we were given. So no one can make you angry. You can allow yourself to become angry. No one can make you happy. That is an emotion that is brought about by our own feelings, our own reactions. So whenever we're describing a situation, we want to use what's called I messages or I language. I language describes things. It's descriptive language. It's not evaluative. I language can encourage openness, and it also takes responsibility for situations. We've all been angry. Some of us express anger different than others. And there have been a couple of different hypotheses on how we should handle our anger. So the first one here is called the ventilation hypothesis, and this is the idea that you got to let your anger out, that it helps to yell at people. It helps to, yell at the cosmos, go outside and yell at the stars at night. I don't know. Some people say that getting it all out there is actually going to be helpful. However, it turns out that this is just pseudoscience. It actually is less helpful to express those emotions that way than it is to keep them inside. That's completely counterintuitive. A lot of us, because of what a lot of us have been taught. So this is a debunked hypothesis. Ventilating your anger will actually increase your levels of anger. So when you do need to express anger through communication, be calm and logical about it. Think your way through it. Be rational about the situation, describing it maybe even as if you were not a part of it. Sometimes that's a good way to think logically, is to take yourself out of a situation and describe it objectively. Examine your communication choices. What's the best channel to communicate this anger? Consider delaying expression, especially in the case of writing a message back to someone who's made you angry, whether that's an email or a text message or an instant message. It is often best to delay your response. They suggest here in the text to go ahead and write that email, but don't send it. Save it to your drafts or send it to yourself so you have it, and then that way you can return to it later and see if you still need to send it to that person or if you need to edit it. Remember that display rules vary from place to place. What's appropriate for you to express in the workplace or in your status in a culture. And then also remember that communication's irreversible. When we speak in anger, this is what damages relationships probably more often than not, is when people express themselves in anger and they hurt feelings, and it just damages everything within that relationship. So communication's irreversible. Remember that. And then you want to apply the skills that you have in interpersonal communication. Don't be dramatic about your anger. Think through it. Communicate. Use your words, as they say, especially to small children. Instead of just acting out, describe things. Use words. And remember, going back to that ventilation hypothesis, that's a bad idea. Anger grows when expressed that way. Another big part of emotional competence in communication is the ability to recognize and respond to the emotional state of others. So part of this is going to be you looking at other people's nonverbal cues. Something that may be important for you to remember is that nonverbal cues are more of a hypothesis, an educated guess about someone's emotional state. It's not a conclusion. So we cannot determine someone's full emotional state by their nonverbal behavior. That's pseudoscience at best. It's been popularized in the media, in TV shows, and all of that, but we are just not capable of doing that. It is a clue to how someone feels. You might also look for cues or clues to what a person wants you to do in response. Do they want a hug? Do they want you to keep your distance? Do they want you to talk to them, or do they want you to just listen to them? When you are listening, use active listening techniques that we've talked about previously in the listening chapter. Things like nonverbal encouragement, paraphrasing, asking sincere questions. You need to be able to empathize, to feel with them. Don't dismiss their feelings. Focus on the other person, even if you are sharing an experience that you had that was emotional in nature, that's similar to theirs. Make sure the focus remains on them, and you don't turn the focus of the conversation to you alone. And again, remember that communication is irreversible. Being dismissive to someone's emotional state will stick with that person. It may not be as detrimental as expressing anger. However, it may be the last time that person comes to you and shares their emotions with you. So you may permanently damage a relationship by being dismissive. You may be dealing with people who are experiencing grief. Now, grief can come from a lot of different places. It may come from the loss of a loved one. It may come from the loss of a job or a major financial setback. It may come from even the loss of a pet in some cases. In some cases, it may come from the loss of a major sporting event like the Super Bowl. But people experience grief for different reasons, and obviously, depending on the trigger of that grief, the grief may be felt differently by that person. This is a 5-stage series of what we experience when we go through grief. And as they point out in your text, you won't always go through each of these stages in this order. Sometimes they will overlap as well. This is worth looking at a little bit deeper. People go through the denial phase. They act like it didn't happen, just pretend this can't be possible, that kind of a thing. Anger, well, that makes sense. If you lose someone, you're angry that they're not here anymore. Sometimes they're angry at the person. Sometimes they're angry at the doctors who are treating them or the drunk driver that hit them. Sometimes they're angry at God. Sometimes they're angry at the universe. In the bargaining phase, as your text indicates, sometimes people are going to try to make a deal with God, with the cosmos, with whatever deity they believe in. That if I'm super good, then maybe you can bring them back. Or if the person hasn't died yet, you can save them. And then there's depression. And then there's finally acceptance, where you're not over your grief, you're not over sadness, you're not necessarily done missing a person, but you have accepted that it's happened and you move forward. So it's a 5-stage series of what we go through when we encounter grief. So when you're communicating with the grief-stricken, confirm the other person's emotions. Let them know that what they're experiencing is valid. They don't need to feel guilty about it. There's nothing wrong with feeling sad or whatever it is they're feeling. It's all part of the grieving process. Again, choose the appropriate channel of communication. A sympathy card may be in order, but if it's a close friend, they probably want more from you than a sympathy card. They probably don't want an instant message from you. Via social media, it says, hey, I'm sorry. They want something deeper, maybe face-to-face, a phone call. So they want to hear another human voice. As I've already indicated, when we confirm other people's emotions, a lot of times we need to give them permission to grieve. People don't need permission to grieve, but maybe they need that permission to grieve in our presence. They don't have to put on a strong face. They don't have to act like everything's normal and nothing has happened. You understand that they're in a dark place. Don't focus on the bright side. A lot of times focusing on the bright side of a situation is going to come across as dismissive and demeaning. Encourage them to express their feelings. I'm feeling some redundancy here in what I'm saying. Making sure they know that it's okay to express their feelings. If they're sad and they want to tell you about it, by all means, go for it. I'm here to listen. Again, pay attention to nonverbals. Notice leave-taking cues. Sometimes those will be verbal, where they will literally tell you that they need to move on. Don't insist on making them stick around or sticking around yourself. Other times it may be looking at watches or the clock or edging toward the door. Those are all leave-taking cues that you might want to watch when someone's done expressing their grief. And then, of course, if someone is experiencing grief and you're being sincere, let the person know that you're there, that you're available. We always hear the cliches of, well, I'm here if you need me, just call me. If there's anything you need, just let me know. Most of the time we want to avoid cliches in communication, but often when dealing with the grief-stricken, those are at least appreciated cliches, even if they don't act upon those offers.